The Reputation Institute's Country Rep Track is a global study of reputations of 50 countries conducted annually in January among 27,000 consumers in G8 countries, Canada, France, etc. We know what they are. This year, an additional study of South Africa's reputation among the G8 countries was done in August-September. From the Reputation Institute in the Joburg studio is Trevor Ndlazi, who's the country manager at that institute. Trevor, thanks very much for joining us. How does South Africa fare? Because it seems to me there's two different views here. One from overseas and one from within.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having us, Lindsay. South Africa actually fares very well when we look at the international picture. And when we look at the local picture, South Africans aren't as optimistic about how South Africa's reputation is doing.
So what has happened that has given us a better reputation in the G8 countries? I mean, I'm reading one of the things here, and it says to me that if people think that Nelson Mandela's health is better, then they perceive South Africa's health as better as well, which is a very spurious link in my opinion. Well,
that's the thing. South Africa is very strongly associated with Nelson Mandela, and a lot of people globally tend to equate the two in terms of how well we're doing versus how well Nelson Mandela is doing. If you remember, he's seen as the person who pulled South Africa together, and to a very large extent who probably still is perceived internationally as being very important for South Africa's hegemony, for lack of a better word.
Does this then undermine the survey? I'm not being nasty about the survey, but if somebody says Oscar Pistorius reflects badly on South Africa, so then in my survey I'm going to say I don't think South Africa has a great reputation. Marikana is something different, but Oscar Pistorius and Nelson Mandela, I'm not so sure.
If you think about it this way, Oscar Pistorius, the incident that happened, you have somebody who is an Olympic athlete, internationally well-renowned, highly regarded. Something happens, and the question then becomes, what's going to happen to him? Will there be due process in terms of how the case is treated, and what does that tell you about the country? So that's where you get that reflection in terms of the reputation.
The judicial system, the legal system, etc. I take your point.
Absolutely.
What are the most important things of respondents when they look at a country and when they have this survey? How do you rank their responses?
Well, there are 16 attributes that we look at, and we break them up into 3 dimensions, and those dimensions are economic advancement of the economy. The other is the environment in which the country is. In other words, is it a pleasant country to live in? Is it a beautiful country in terms of natural abundance, etc., etc.? And the other has to do with governance. So we ask questions related to those 3 dimensions, and we break them down, and then when we do the analysis, it comes back and tells us whether people feel positively about the governance in the country, or whether they regard the natural endowments as being a strong attractiveness contributed to the country.
Certainly when it comes to corporate governance, Trevor, we're right up there, because I've noticed that in another survey, a competitiveness survey. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. But let's go through some of the other ones. Where did we score well and where did we score badly? Things like friendly and welcoming, safe environment, contribution to the global economy. You mentioned perhaps physical beauty. If you look just behind us here, of course, we must be #1 in the world, or at least #2 at worst. So what do people think of us?
Well, in terms of our natural endowments, people rate us very favorably. It is around the issues of governance and around safety where we have big catching up to do, where we are perceived as not being well governed. We're also perceived as not being very efficient in terms of our systems and our ability to deliver as a country for social benefit. And those are the areas that we need to address as South Africans, as the South African government, as well as the South African populace and citizenry.
Okay, so we've made a step in the right direction in this August-September survey, certainly in the eyes of overseas people. But this next part of your report is absolutely shocking. It says, in spite of this positive showing I've just mentioned, South Africans' perceptions of their own country were significantly more negative. I think it went down to 33.69, 17.5 points.
Absolutely.
A huge move.
Absolutely. So we sampled, we draw a small sample of South Africans to ask them what they feel about South Africa. And the interesting thing is that when we look at the overall country comparisons, you find that we are by South Africans, we're grouped closer to Iraq than we are grouped to countries like South Korea, which is where the G8 countries see us as being. So South Africans are feeling in a state of of constant, as we've said earlier, constant anxiety. If you think back to a couple of weeks when we're expecting protracted mine industry strikes that we are anticipating might become violent, etc., none of which fortunately happened, but that's the kind of environment that we're in. We're not expecting things to go well.
The South African respondents viewed the country as performing well in only 2 attributes, you say, Trevor. A beautiful country, that's pretty obvious, and an enjoyable country. I suppose that's the outdoor life. I mean, I don't know, what is an enjoyable country?
And I mean, the interesting thing about those 2 is that those are the 2 things that we as South Africans have nothing to do with. You know, those are the things that God gave us, so to speak. And it's really just talking about the lifestyle in the country. It's about the environment from a people point of view. So these are not governance related. These are not policy-related issues. These are just, would you enjoy being in the country if you found yourself in it? And South Africans are very friendly people, and we're very welcoming, etc. The problem, though, is that we don't translate that into coming together towards driving a better reputation for South Africa. And this is very important because reputation has direct economic impact.
You're quite scathing in your assessment of your fellow South Africans in this regard. You say that many of us live in a perpetually hyped up state in which we wait on tenterhooks and in a state of near panic for the next catastrophe to befall us as a country. Do you think it's really that bad?
Well, I would say if we just grab the daily paper and just page 3 or 4 pages, and this is the kind of feeling that you get. And if you listen to the radio programs when people are calling in, you get exactly the same sentiment, where people are feeling as though, you know, what's the next thing that's going to happen? Again, coming back to the mining sector, the sentiment was not that we're expecting labor negotiations to proceed smoothly. We have an industrial relations framework that has been in place for a long time, has worked, has delivered. Yes, we had a bit of turbulence, but we don't expect it to continue. Instead, what has happened is people have expected it to go the other direction.
Do you think the media is responsible partly for this sort of attitude? I mean, I'm a notorious curmudgeon when it comes to certain things, but I do feel as though I and my colleagues have a responsibility not to run down the country all the time. Whenever there's some good news, we really do try and broadcast it. Is the media complicit in this whole survey?
I think the media has a positive role to play in driving a positive perception of South Africa amongst South Africans. And I think to a large extent, in as much as the objective is to report fairly and in a balanced way, the sentiment that tends to override is that we're coming from, and if you think about it, 2012 was really, 2013, we almost were in a boxing ring where we got hit by a 2-3 shot that we weren't anticipating. And we're still recovering from that very negative period in our history, in our recent history, where things have been very bad. So I think the media really has a positive role to play in driving a positive message, but a balanced message. The critical thing is this, that there are issues that are not working in our country that do need to be addressed. The risk that we face is that we're perceived very well, but there are these areas, these gaps that if they're not addressed will actually result in the perception, the positive perception, turning negative. And as we said before, reputation has a direct economic impact. If you think about tourism, for example, the statistic that one tourist creates X number of jobs, and for every job in South Africa, we know there are probably 10 people dependent on that one job. So if our reputation falls and people are less willing to come to South Africa, that has a direct impact on an ordinary man in the street.